Because fascism has been reduced to a word, and for those who brand themselves as such, merely an empty identity, devoid of any actual philosophy, the conception of the state inherent to idealist metaphysicians has long faded, being forgotten in time, cast aside by history. But the question should still be answered, perhaps simply because it's never been answered, like how certain individuals touch upon really discussed topics in order to bring light to the obscure phenomenon. See, when we discuss the state here, we're not referring to the state in the traditional sense of the term, which refers to groups wielding a monopoly on force and violence within a certain geographical territory. Now, while fascism is in favor of a small group of policymakers and a small squad to enforce such policies as laws, this is a shallow view of how laws are made and enforced within a fascist state, or any state for that matter. Idealists would argue that every single person makes the laws just as anyone else, because every social environment is the product of collective consciousness, what can be referred to as national consciousness, since the inhabitants of a nation would structure and paint what the nation appears as, how it operates. So let's get to the actual meaning of the state. Within idealism and fascism, to better comprehend what it means that every single thing, living or inanimate, is within its sphere. Metaphysical idealism holds all things exist within the confines of the mind. That anything outside of it simply does not exist, that observation brings something into reality and also shapes its nature and function. Now, this isn't the mind of a single person, rather every person occupying a certain territory, such as a country, or a town, or a continent at largest. If a state is a group with monopoly on force, who determines laws and enforces them, it would also make sense to say that every person is the state, just as much as anyone else is, since their observation determines the course of all events, all actions. This means that we're the state, quite glaringly. I'm the state, you're the state, and so are the politicians, presidents, monarchs, and prime ministers. They're no more the state than us, seeing we placed them into power and created how they look and speak. What Friedrich Hegel had commented upon long ago was the fact that the subject, the conceiving conscious entity, and the object, the inanimate generated property of consciousness, are one and the same, identical, literally the same person, essence. Since objects created by consciousness and are a representation of the will of the subjects, they are the subject just as much as the subjects are themselves. For instance, in a dream, every single inanimate object, from bookshelves to forests to mountains, are all ourselves, since they're a byproduct of our imagination, exist only insofar as we think about them. And if reality is nothing external to the force of every living being, all objects are ourselves in a different form. But of course, this means that not only are subject and objects the same person, spiritual actuality, but all subjects and all objects are one as well. It's not that certain objects are you, since they're created by your mind, but that all objects are you, since everything is a collective effort on the part of all people. So when you walk through the wilderness, or through a park, or the trees, or the grass, the sky, they're all you, and all everyone else. They're 100% everyone, and everything. The trees appear to be separate, but at the same time, they don't. See, when one gazes upon a giant collection of trees, their mind categorizes all such objects into one object for the sake of convenience. Flower beds of hundreds to thousands of flowers appear as just one thing to the mind. So the flowers are you, and you are the flowers. Flowers are also your father, your mother, your grandparents, your friends, your romantic partner, your teacher, your cats, your dogs, and the concrete construction workers manufactured. The person you're speaking with is you, and you are the person you're speaking with. Or rather, as you watch this video, you exist as me, and I exist as you. Now we have to ask the question, what is God? To understand what God is, we have to understand what God is not. God is absolutely not some man in the sky with a big old white beard who looks down upon his children and hopes they're behaving well. No, God is no physical embodiment, and the reason we give them one is just because it's easy and convenient to do so. God is not external to us, is what's important to remember. Rather, we are God, and God is us. To phrase things even more elegantly, everything is everything, and can never be apart. In order to believe that God is apart from us, is not just ourselves, this would mean believing in individuals, this individualism destroying the entire collectivist ontology of fascism, eternally contradicting everything. So what is God, you ask? Quite simply, the consciousness that existed before all other consciousnesses. Since observation creates reality in idealism, there had to be a consciousness which was present prior to the birth of living beings on Earth. So God was there, their consciousness able to generate the world which human beings stepped foot on. So this has always been framed as though God has always existed and will always exist, as is true to the essence of God. What's being referenced is the fact that within idealism, consciousness is immortal, indestructible. Materialism would hold that matter has always existed and will always exist, as somethingness can emerge from nothingness. God is, very simply, just a stand-in for the concept of the mind, a mind which connects with all others. As Earth is God, and God is Earth, human beings and animals and insects and everything in existence is God because everything is consciousness, either standing as itself or projected onto a landscape. like a paintbrush upon a canvas. Could it be remarked that God is the state? Yes, it can accurately. If God has created entity sustains everything, it reasons that God creates the laws and enforces them within each individual nation, as we do since we're God and God is us. The conclusion reaches that the state is a synonym for everything and anything. Can anything exist outside of it? In idealism, never, not even for a microsecond. This leads us to the fascist criticism of thinkers such as Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes, who was a materialist, made a great mistake when he framed the state, being set against the individuals inside of it, as a necessary evil, or to phrase matters alternatively, a social system to regulate the behaviors of the people beneath it. Two things must be noted. One, in fascism, the state is not beneath the individuals who, to some, appear inside of it. This is because the individuals don't reside within the state. The state resides within the collective. In materialism, one steps into a cave, that individual is inside the cave. In idealism, whether or not someone steps into a cave, as long as the cave is imagined to exist, the cave exists within that person. And not just that person, but every person. The state doesn't control us, we control the state and use it to discover and exercise liberty for the national collective. The state doesn't exist within the nation exists within the state. Everything resides within the state. 2. The second problem with Hobbes' statism. It doesn't at all promote liberty. The implication of Hobbes' theory of the state is that of a philosophy of misery, which states human beings in their natural habitat, when left to themselves, are evil and savage, that it's only through social construction that they can behave better. But if the state and individual, or rather collective, are one, what does this imply? It implies, if examined correctly, that human beings will always be terrible because their nature is terrible, and their nature, meaning their consciousness, determines their social and political environments. But Gentili didn't hold this to be the case. Rather, the only time human beings walk astray from the true path is when they don't utilize their minds to create an idealist state, but use the abilities of idealism to create a politically materialist state. For instance, Gentili could well argue that the Soviet Union, which was a politically materialist state, was created by the minds of the people, with their minds being used wrongly here. If idealism is true, the people must be representative of this spiritual reality to bring it to life. While Gentili believed in true democracy, he believed it should be used to create landscapes upholding of the principles of a spiritualism, not of rationalist and physicalist ideology. A unique criticism of anarchism has been made, true idealist ontology. Anarchists are the belief that they're set against the state, as opposed to being interchangeable to the state. If everything is the state and nothing exists outside of it, what will happen in anarchy is simply an occurrence of all the world's same old issues, the identical problems reoccurring, only without any proper organization, any experts around to fix them, to improve standards of living. As a result, due to minds being scattered, civilization will not grow, instead rapidly decline. The only true liberty rests within that which pure democracy can achieve, which now refers to the elections, or voting, that goes on in our societies, only to the events and properties that collective consciousness is able to produce.